So thank you everyone for joining us. I love people analytics and future work webinars because a lot of times, like a lot of us know each other and you've probably, met Ian or you've met me. And if not, welcome to the family. It's great to have you. So I started working with the topic of people analytics. I don't know. Informally, I'm going to say it was like 2007. Nobody was calling it people analytics then. But I remember I was a career builder and my leader at the time, who Jackie knows as well, Mary Delaney, brought me in to build talent intelligence team. And I was like, what? Like I was a young PhD. I'm like, what am I doing here? Data portals. What in the world is that? I've never worked with technology. Like I test hypotheses and I run experiments. I was just collecting college kid data like inside of research labs. And so I thought I started saying this in some of the conferences, like when I first started interviewing for jobs in my mid to late 20s after my PhD, people would say, well, what is it that you really don't want to do? And I thought, I don't love to work with numbers. Like I love leadership development and I love training. And like the joke's on me because my entire career really surrounded around numbers and people analytics. And there's so much power in it. Like once I really understood after like the 10 billion statistics classes I took as a part of my PhD and HDI, like stuff that I was like, oh my God, there's so many numbers and there's so much SPSS. When I've learned really how it moves things in the real world, I fell in love with it and I've never really turned back. So thank you all for loving people analytics as much as we do and for joining us today. So I'll introduce myself quickly and then I'll turn it over to Ian. So my name is Sanja Lucina. I am the president at Question Pro Workforce. I'm an organizational psychologist. I lead our everything related to employee surveys. So I've done, as I was just mentioning in my introduction, a lot of different work around analytics in my career. And I've had focus on candidate experience and big data aggregation and recognition platforms, performance management, like you name it. I feel like I've touched it in my career. And it was actually a client of Question Pros when I first started my career in people analytics in 2007. And I fell in love with surveys for a few different reasons, mainly because I think there's so much power in asking people questions and really understanding who they are and what they want and finding different ways to open up. And if you ever heard me present before, you've heard me say that I do believe research is me search. And so I was also born and raised in Serbia and former Yugoslavia. I spent a little bit over 20 years in the US, a little bit in London. Now I'm in beautiful Buenos Aires, Argentina for almost 9 years, which I still can't believe when I say it. And so surveys and questions and getting to know people has been so personally important to me because people are so different. And especially when you start to get to different cultures and organizations and everything, there's so much to learn. And there's so many changes that we all go through. That's something that maybe I asked somebody a year ago, they can be a totally different person today, and their life could have changed in such profound ways. And so I think it's just this amazing way to have a conversation and inside of organizations really get to know people at scale. And so that's me. That's my job for today. Ian, the mic over to you.
Thanks, Sonia. Good to see you and good to be here. Real quick on me, Ian O'Keefe, I've been in people analytics properly for like past 12, 15 years. I've been in management consulting, then in kind of corporate ODOE roles, and then in people analytics since 2012 onward. Unlike you, Sonia, I first heard of it as a job in 2011, 2010, in and around there. And then I got into that job in 2012 with people analytics at Sears Holdings in the Chicago area of all places. And then from there went to run a piece of the team at Google and then build and run the team at JP Morgan and build and run the team at Amazon. And I recently, last fall, set up Icona Analytics quietly, and started to be a little bit more out loud with that in Q1 of this year. And I'll talk more about what we do, but basically, I'm taking my experiences of building and scaling people analytics at large orgs and helping large orgs do that, but also bringing that down to smaller, mid-sized orgs in different ways. And yeah, excited to kind of go into some of that with you today.
love it. Thank you so much. So we'll jump into a little bit more details of what it is that we do. So um a while back, we've been doing webinars at Question Pro for as long as I've been with the organizations and even before my time. And one of the pieces of feedback that I got at some point is because, as I mentioned, like I'm a researcher at heart and I want to share data and I want to share findings and stories. And after a while, people would say, "Oh, that's really great. But I have no idea what Question Pro does." And I thought, shoot, I talk about everything and share everything except for what like the organization I work for actually does. So real quick as an intro, Question Pro, in our heart, like I was mentioning, we want to understand people and we want to understand people when it comes to research and new products and universities. And we have a whole research suite and market research arm of our organization. We also have a whole customer experience arm. So when it comes to any interactions, whether you had it with retailers, whether you had it with airlines, hotels, organizations always want to know, like, hey, how did we do? And how can we do better? And so that's a whole other arm of our business. And then the third arm is the one that I lead, which is all around employee experience. So, how do we create these critical surveys and critical points in employees' lifetime where they want to share information with us, right? Where they say, like, I love being here, but you could maybe do this better, or I love being here and I want to share it with you so you can get other people inside the organization and excited about us. So, really, everything about employee listening and that connection and being able to really take information from that input all the way to action and really sustainably changing people's lives for the better inside the organization. So, we're about 350 people at Question Pro, and we're a global organization. We're literally like everywhere you can imagine. I mentioned I'm sitting in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and we have a small team here, and we didn't even make the map. I need to add us as a dot here, but we work across the globe in different markets, all different kinds of languages, a number of different data centers. So that is really our passion as an organization. And Ian, over to you. So you could tell us a little bit more about Icona and how you've taken this just absolutely incredible applied experience over the last decade or so. Or now, I think it's such a gift. I
A
really do
gift. I
what
really
you're
do what
doing.
you're doing. I appreciate it. Yeah, we're just getting started. For now, it's me, and I work with a small army of fractional engineers, analysts, PMs, as well as an amazing set of partners, Sonia, like you, and the team at Question Pro and others that provide really, I think, proven and scaled like data and platform capability for clients that need it. And when there's a great product or a capability out there in the market that a client could buy, that's sometimes out of their decision set until you mention it to them. And so a lot of what we do is help kind of calibrate on that build, buy, borrow equation
Mm.
when it comes to the kind of people analytic capabilities that you need across governance, infrastructure, methods to create insight out of data, all the quantitative methods, and then products that you can choose from. So those are pillars that I'll talk a little bit about later today. And how I bring those to life in the form of services, a couple things. Analytic coaching is that's opportunistic, kind of one-on-one mentorship, sparring partner type sessions that I have with analytic leaders. The three services in the middle kind of hang together. That's really about if you don't have a program, but you have a lot of data, and you're figuring out how to build a people analytics program, what capabilities you have or need, and then what your roadmap looks like. That can be a from scratch situation or a getting from crawl to walk or walk to run. We have a team and we want to go faster. We want to get more predictive. We want to get productionized with our models and so forth. What are the capabilities we need? How do we do that? How do we go faster? What do we do in this next 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, et cetera? And then the last piece is solutions design. These are bespoke solutions that would be in the form of analytic projects, data explorations, model development, productionized model integration with products, including Gen AI, which we can talk a little bit about. So basically kind of running the full gamut of like working with people to make analytic teams better, the programs themselves to kind of augment their capabilities, and then bespoke solution depending on what client needs are and working with partners to do that. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we do at Icona, and look forward to adding to this list and saying more the next time we speak.
Mm. I love that. And again, like I'll reiterate what I said before. I think it's so valuable what you're doing because you've had so much hands-on experience building these functions. And I know I'm a big proponent of, test things and fail and learn from it, but also if other people have experimented, if we've already, had learnings as a community in people analytics, I guess in other words, if we can learn from each other's failures so we can make more innovative mistakes in the future, I think that's where really services like this help because you can help put that structure, those learnings. You can take your experience from different organizations that had different resources and different teams, and maybe slightly different goals, even to
Yeah.
really help someone get to where they need to go faster. And to me, that's so incredibly valuable.
Yeah, I would add to it too that the use cases of what problems you might solve in a very large org like an Amazon or a Google or JP, I think gone are the days where you can say, well, they're that big, so only they have like they can afford to do that. And it's like, well, no, now like there's a ton of capability that you have option to build or buy or borrow at
Mhm.
mid-size org levels, smaller org levels, and the only barrier really nowadays is the falling in love with the right problem to solve, and then figuring out how you want to do that with in-house resources or partners or other capabilities. So I love how it's gotten kind of out of the large enterprise, globally scaled ranks and down into orgs of all sizes and shapes.
Yeah, I love that too. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
So, without further ado, let's jump in. So, one of the things that you and I had originally talked about when we were first thinking about the webinar, right? And what content do we share? Because an hour is never enough. Like, there's so much to cover,
Yeah.
and there's people in different parts of the journey. And I've heard you speak before about productization of people analytics, and I think even you talked with Al about it at Telreos last year, and what that means and what the benefit for the organization is. And so for our listeners, there's a lot in each pillar. So we could probably, spend an hour on just this slide alone.
Yep.
But to start to go through it, when you think about these key pillars and the approach to productization, what are some things like what are the different steps? What are the things that you would highlight? What are like the absolute, I mean, I know most of it is probably like a must do, but to your point, if there's organizations of different sizes and they're looking at this and they're saying like, wow, this feels like a lot. And maybe I'm not exactly at the beginning of the journey, but not quite, really sophisticated and just fine tuning. How would you approach this? Do you mind walking our friends and listeners through the journey of people analytics productization?
Yeah. I think a couple of things are important on this page. One, that if you take nothing else away from this page, what I would take away is that the word analytics in people analytics, it gets tossed around an awful lot to mean many different things. And often that word is kind of in the eye of the beholder. And what I like to do is frame what we mean by analytics according to these pillars. So whether you're a large, globally kind of established enterprise consumer of analytics or you're a smaller or just getting started, oftentimes we equate analytics with the math you use to create insight out of data, which would be methods, what I would call methods. And there's simple things you can do to query data and complex things you can do to do research, including surveys or build statistical models. But the methods we use need to come to life in the form of decision making, and that happens when you put those insights into an accessible product format, whether it's a report that goes out on email on Monday morning, or a self-service dashboard, or a more complex productionized, interface in the form of a product, a software product. So I think those are what I see a lot of people kind of mentally going towards when they hear the word analytics. It's like the math and then the stuff that I have, right? On the left-hand side of the slide, governance and infra, these would be every people analytics leader that I know of would probably agree that if you're not intentionally kind of covering off on the way that your data is managed, acquired, cataloged, defined on the governance side, and then the right type of infrastructure, the technology stack you have to land, to store, to secure, and make your data analytically ready. Um, if you're not intentionally planning for that, you often stumble across it in painful ways when you embark on your first research study or first model
Mhm.
build, and you run into legal here, compliance there, tech here, and you start to see these functional adjacencies to analytics that are very, very quickly dependencies and ideally partners that you need to kind of build into your people analytics program. So I like to put all this on the same page. Without these four pillars
Mhm.
and the different capabilities within that, your analytics will not go as fast as you like, will not be as scaled as they could be, will not be as insightful as possible, and will not be as accessible vis-a-vis products. So when you think about why it's hard, I think knowing how and when to pull on each of the capabilities that are across these pillars is what people analytics leaders and teams need to do. And the good news, given that there's so much on this page, is that different problems need different combinations of solutions. And
Mhm.
if you think about these little slices as as lights that might light up brightly on, say, a reporting problem versus a more complex predictive problem for predicting something around talent. You're not using all these at the same time all the time. So I think it's a handy device to frame what we mean by analytics, to show that there's dependencies and there's kind of an us and a village involved in bringing analytics to life to make decisions. And this is what I call the four pillars of people analytics. And I think this is why it's hard, at least in my experience, to do all of this well. Takes uh, what you bring as a leader, but also what the team brings and the partnerships that you build inside the org and some of the partnerships that you buy from third parties as well. So this all kind of plays into that capability building equation.
Yeah. No, and I'm glad you clarified that as well, because again, like if somebody is looking at this page, and it is hard, and getting it right is a challenge. It's a challenge worth doing, but it's also not necessarily a checklist. It's like you have to be doing all of this at every moment of your journey. It's different levers that are pulling the different parts. And so to understand what are the things to keep in mind, to understand what are the areas to focus on and how to build the journey inside your organization is important. So
Yeah. Knowing where your org is and also kind of culturally what your org is ready for or not, right? If you ignore the governance pillar and your org is very new to analytics and risk averse generally, you will be in hot water quickly. Or
mhm.
if you underestimate how we can land data and organize it within the tech stack, you won't be able to move as fast as you like. So um, learning, like you said at the start, Sanja, learning these are all mistakes in some form or fashion that we've all kind of made. I've certainly made my fair share of them, but looking around the corner on these items is why I like to put this page forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like we were saying, I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important to talk to others in our community, because I remember I've worked in a lot of different analytics platforms, and some of them were probably ahead of their time. And I remember, I think it was probably in 2013 when I moved to London, I was working on a technology that would aggregate different data inputs from your ATS, your HIRS, your survey, like all of these. And we thought, what a phenomenal idea. Like, how rich of data are you going to be able to have? And then when we started to work on it, we're like, oh my God, everything is such a mess. Everything
Mhm.
is like coded differently, stored differently, like something that intuitively sounded like it has such a great purpose on the end. The journey there ended up being infinitely more difficult than what we anticipated. And so again,
Mhm.
I think at the time, not as many organizations were doing it yet. Now we're like, a decade later, and there's data's in a lot better place. In many instances, there are still things that need validation and updating and
Yep.
all of those different things. But I think even like when you and I have talked about like setting stakeholder expectations and committing to outcomes and committing to deadlines, a lot of times, if we don't have those conversations at the beginning, we're not always sure what we don't know. And if we're innovating, if we're going down a path that's really brand new and not generally explored by organizations, that's going to be natural. And we're going to need to be transparent about that. But if there are opportunities for us to learn, like, hey, what have you done in your organizations, or what platforms are available, or what are, some of the things that we absolutely have to know, it's going to make that journey so much more pleasant.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I would say too that when you're doing anything that's first of kind involving data that you might be familiar with and data that you may not be familiar with, um, plan for things to do not plan for the ideal set of conditions and the ideal timeline that associates with that. It's uncomfortable to put buffer into your plan. No one likes to do that, but I guarantee that the way, if I look at these pillars, the way that data is defined in the governance layer across seven data systems that, four of which you may be familiar with and three of which you won't, you will probably run into some, you know, uh, coding and unification issues on like unique identifiers. And then that's going to kind of hamper how you land it in infra and how you analyze it in methods. And so boring but important details that, for a senior stakeholder, they probably don't care about that, but they do care if you say 4 weeks and it turns out to be 9, and you didn't plan for
Uh-huh.
like 3 weeks of spinning. So um,
Yeah.
you have to thread that needle carefully, but I think the complexity across this page does come to life and play out in timelines, and you just might not know where you're going to spend more time on a project, but somewhere in this grid, you will spend more time than you bargained for,
Yeah.
especially with first of kind
Yeah.
projects.
Absolutely. So the next question or point of discussion that I feel like I've had probably from the first day in my career, um, build, buy, or borrow.
Right.
So I don't know if there's always a perfect answer, and it probably oftentimes depends on many different things, but I do think that we can provide some guidance for somebody that's going in and saying, okay, I'd love to accomplish this based on your experience. We're looking at these different pillars. What would you
Yeah.
recommend? Like, what would you recommend for us to look, consider as a first step solution?
So it does depend on the org, and I sometimes I put like a salt shaker on this slide because it is to be taken with grains of salt. But
Mhm.
generally, where the market has kind of evolved to now, as opposed to where it was 5, 6, 7 years ago, um, uh, governance governance is when it comes to legal, compliance, ethics, the way that data is generated and acquired vis-a-vis HR processes and programs, and how that rides the rails of privacy. Like that's typically not the depth of expertise of analysts that are deep in methods. And so I find that you're typically borrowing that capability and kind of borrowing and bolting into an existing data privacy program, either in HR or in the enterprise, kind of managed out of a central team. So looking to borrow and tack into existing capabilities and mechanisms inside your org is something that I've seen work well. And invariably, you will need to build some new mechanism and some new connective tissue and muscle inside of HR when it comes to HR data governance, because HR people data has its own sensitivities and uniquenesses that you can't just slap an enterprise like master data management schema to
Yeah.
and watch it go. So um, uh, that's the kind of pattern I typically see where you can kind of cover off and get value for your time. Whereas infrastructure, um, I think there's quite a few case studies of teams that have built infrastructure. I've led some of those teams, and I still think that's a pattern. But I think more commonly now, buying your buying infrastructure in the form of just cloud-based infrastructure, or like using the cloud platforms that come with your HCM, your new shiny HCM out of the box. that's often a default setting for a lot of teams, or borrowing existing kind of like database environments that central tech or central analytics might be offering. Um, One spot that I put a hard check mark on to build is methods. Now, like I get tomatoes thrown at me sometimes when I say that, because because like, well, we have methods and you should buy those as well. And I would kind of tease that question out in the form of products versus methods. If you're going to build up a muscle inside of HR and a people analytics team, I think building up the kind of the methodological strength to understand the types of techniques and methods you might use to solve certain problems is a really good place to invest. Borrowing that from other parts of the org is a pattern I see in the form of like peer reviews. Um, Whereas products, building products that face up to many people, managers, knowing the kinds of questions to put into, say, for instance, on your survey, and the fact that we should survey, that's, I think, a great starting point for people analytics team to then go, all right, well, how do we do that? Should we build our own survey
Yeah.
product? I wouldn't recommend. I wouldn't recommend
Don't do
that.
it.
I wouldn't recommend that.
Yeah.
I would recommend an established player that spent years and years honing that and bringing that into the fold in a scalable way. Uh, and that this is where the market has really grown up over the past 5, 6, 7 years. The amount of productized kind of analytic delivery systems that you can buy now
Yeah.
is pretty incredible. I still think there is room for in-house building, and and often complementing that with a select number of third parties that you're leaning on from a buy side is the pattern I see now.
Yeah.
And I'll just wrap it up by saying there's what ifs that flow through this chart. You could pick this chart apart, but I think the general patterns I see typically follow this trend.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I mean, again, there's very rarely in life anything that's very definitive without any what ifs, like on the situation, on the maturity, on the resources, on what you want to accomplish. But I think at least having a guideline based on like general direction is really valuable. And to me, what's interesting is for me personally, I'm the most familiar with product. I've built product in some way, shape, or form my entire career, more on the solution provider and not necessarily in-house. But I think to illustrate one of the examples you're giving, so survey technologies, again, like ATSs, HRSs have been around forever. And if
Right.
you've ever been on the product end for those organizations, man, like you know everything that goes into it, every feature, every functionality, solving bugs, increasing efficiencies, looking at performance, like how big the team is that's just doing that. And so usually what somebody sitting across the table from me when they'd ask, I would say, listen, like for that, just don't, like if you do have the resources internally, if you have developers, if you have a product manager, I would much more recommend to innovate on something. So
Mhm.
take the technology, and you were mentioning that, like, what can you build on it? So for example, when I worked at Question Pro, or Question, when I worked at Career Builder and we were using Question Pro, we used Question Pro as a survey collection technology, and then we built our own applicant experience analytics that were
Mhm.
powered by technology from Question Pro. Now, Question Pro didn't have at the time the story we wanted to tell, but we were sure not about to build a survey collection mechanism when it existed. And actually, in the grand scheme of things, when you look at the numbers, it was quite affordable, both from, the timeline that you're going to get something done as well as maintenance. So, but that's where those kinds of conversations. So I say that with, again, my experience being by and far in the product and the methods, as well too. But I think for an organization to take a step back, understand, have that conversations around what do I have available today? What mark do I want to make? How do I want to differentiate internally? And how fast do I want to get there, right? Because sometimes when we build something, it's also comfortable because it's your own, you can control the roadmap, you can build exactly what you want. but you have to look at it against the cost, the timeline. And again, I'm a huge proponent if it's something innovative, because that, again, you use the technology and the engines that exist to accelerate your development. And then you put something on top that's going to be maybe unique to your organization and solve that unique challenge in a way that resonates with your stakeholders. I think that's oftentimes very important. As you
Yeah.
mentioned before, like, how do we, you know, a lot of times people want an outcome. They don't necessarily are not interested in all the details of how you got to the outcome or how you got to the solution, and certain things what resonates with your leadership. And so if you can find a way to really connect with them in a way that's unique and speaks like exactly their language and to their need, that could be really powerful in that like whole
Yeah.
kind of complement the buy model with the build and borrow.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's not to say that if you choose to buy certain types of capability, like survey administration and analysis capability, you're not. It's not to say you're completely like outsourcing that activity and not connecting it back. So, like if you learn, let's say, we need to survey to better understand attitudes and sentiment towards um, uh, headwinds and tailwinds related to internal mobility, promotion, and career outlook. Okay,
Mhm.
great. So now we do that. We have that data, and we learn something really powerful that needs to be fixed. What do you do then? Like you need
Mhm.
to build or modify a program or a policy or procedure uh, with that insight as your bedrock. And that's where, say, like a third party is not going to like know your culture, know what needs to be built and modified, and then like change manage your way forward. That's where I think the
Mhm.
analytics team can really be a bridge to like the practical application of the insight, and then measure the pre-post effect of implementing that new thing.
Mhm.
So
Absolutely. So I think we were in our conversation alluding to a lot of what the next slide is covering. We talked about, I feel like this is like the theme of my life, prioritization, where to focus. So we actually just, Gay and I just recorded a podcast earlier today with an author about leadership. And one of the quotes he shared is, it's okay to feel like you can do anything, but it's important not to try to do everything. I'm like,
yes,
yes. I
yes,
feel like that's like should be, I don't know, like every like put up a like, don't try to do everything. So when it comes to thinking about people analytics efforts, and especially like, whew, we still got a lot of things we need to solve inside organizations. And I can comfortably say that about any organization. I feel like no company is out there like, we got it, we nailed this, we don't have any problems, like move on. So when you think about prioritization, what would you be your advice if somebody is on the webinar with us and they're thinking like, I'm really overwhelmed. I'm actually even being asked to solve a lot of different things. Like, how do I pick?
yeah. I, besides some of the obvious advice that I'm sure many have probably heard, like make sure you identify the low-hanging fruit and get quick wins, and yes to all that. One of the seemingly obvious bits that often goes unanswered or not quite fully answered is work backwards from your customer. Who's your customer? In service of HR line leaders and HRBPs, or in service of or in service of every manager, for example, in the organization? Like, are we working backwards from what they need or from what our HR leaders need? Or like, who's the customer? So that example we talked about a minute ago, um, sentiment and insights related to mobility and promotion and career outlook. Who's the end user ultimately of those insights and something we should do differently there? Is it the HRBP that supports the ads group, for example, or is it the head of the ads group and the managers in ads?
Mhm.
So working backwards from what your customers need and defining who they are and who those different personas and those different needs are is a really good way to prioritize um, off of the likelihood of your analytics being used by lots of people to make decisions. So that would be one thing that I would put out there. Another would be uh, enduring truths. So focusing on enduring truths, things that will always be true. There's a lot of, I think a lot of times we get kind of fascinated with what's changing and how do we, like,
Hmm.
maybe we should prioritize
Hmm.
according to what's changing. Maybe think about what always should be true, or what maybe will
Hmm.
never be true. Like, will never it will never be true that employees want more friction, opacity, and bureaucracy related to their performance reviews and promotion evaluations, right? Like, if you see enduring truths being, I don't know, stepped around, overstepped, violated,
No.
that's a good place to look. It's a very good place to look. And then the other bit of advice would be where you can get um, cross-domain kind of force multiplication. So looking at like a comp project versus a talent
Mm.
project, talent evaluation outcomes feed into compensate. Like, so like, how does the natural flow of business process and the employee experience suggest pulling a study together that cuts across a number of different domains
No.
in the HR org chart, as opposed to just lining up stakeholders and the heads of these groups and saying, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want? What do you want? It's like,
Yeah.
well, maybe there's some connective tissue there that we can get a lot of bang for a buck. So those would
Yeah.
be some of the added lenses I'd look at.
Yeah. No, I think really important ones. It actually ties directly into the next point of who are the customers. And I think I know in in my life, a lot of times I've tried, and this is, I mean, more like common sense, like to find champions inside the organization that I know would get excited about my work. And I also knew were well respected and influential, because sometimes maybe there is doubt or like, oh, like, I'd love to learn more about this or help you or provide you with data, but I'm so busy. But then if you see somebody who you respect championing a project and actually showing some real results and return, all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, I want that too. With that being said, I mean, I don't know. That's just been my experience. Again, to try to narrow a little bit more than go after everyone, because it's just a lot
Right.
to take on at once. Have you had any experience with like particular stakeholders maybe being like the best ones to partner with first to have that positive cascading effect, or does that really depend on the organization and what are maybe the industry, or what are some most pressing issues inside the culture at that point?
I think it depends. I think in part you always want to kind of ladder up if you can to uh, kind of the top goals and priorities of the business and HR. Also, though, think about your customers. Uh, where is their kind of inbuilt or natural analytic literacy and momentum and willingness to provide support and air cover and breaking ice on, being an icebreaker on new types of initiatives. I think that matters a lot. The other piece to this question too is um, knowing, kind of matching the type of analytics to the need may not always be what you want to do. Like, if you want to build sophisticated models that are
Mhm.
predictive and put them in prod and deploy them, but we need scrappy descriptive analytics cranked out weekly. Not the coolest, like most aspirational, like job spec for a data scientist, but analysts will kill that all day long. And so,
Mm.
um, knowing what the needs are versus like your wants are, and the team's wants for that matter, is, I've seen mismatches there that don't go well when it's like, we want to do something really innovative and like up here, but like the needs are here. Well, you got to hang down here and prioritize based on what they need. Um, and it kind of goes to I'll jump around a little bit here, but that last question, if there's, if there are stakeholders that are ready to change a process, the way that they go to campus and recruit, or the way that we interview, or the way that we evaluate talent, or the way that we give spot bonuses for great performance. Like, that matters a lot. Because if you learn something insightful about a process or an outcome, but stakeholders are unwilling to change how they're currently doing it, they just wanted it to look smart in their next board meeting. It's like, oh boy, like, asking that last question first to get out of the wouldn't it be interesting if
Yeah.
mode is really important. So I think that second question and the fourth question very much like play, and the first question for that matter, play
Yeah.
into one another.
Yeah. And I think adding to that, the one in the middle, why should org trust your judgment? So sometimes I don't know if this happens often, but I can envision like I don't know if I particularly had experience. I'll need to dig back in my memory bank, but if you have data and you show something that like confirms what an organization knows, but in a quantitative way or maybe in a more methodical way. It's like, oh, I assumed this to be true, and now you're showing me that it is. So it doesn't really add that much value versus like, wait a minute, like this is opposite of what I expected. Are you sure this is right? I don't know. How did you go about this? Because like I've been in this organization for 10 years and I'm really surprised at this. So it's like, how do you like I don't know if earning the trust is maybe like the best word for this example, but how do you still show value even if you're confirming something that was maybe, expected, but even more like the trust in something that's been someone that's been around for a while and they're like, well, actually, I'm really surprised at this and I've been with this company for X number of years. Like, are you sure this is right? How do you
Right.
navigate that?
Yeah, I think by uh, a having a robust scientific approach to like proving if you're bearing out a null hypothesis, that might surprise people. It's like there's no
Yeah,
difference between these two things. Like actually,
yeah,
no. Here's how we did that, and so
yeah,
not burying the lead, showing how you got there, but also acknowledging, how like the data and the analyses may or may not pair and foot with anecdotes. And
yeah.
I've been on a number of projects where the science, the quantitative methods and the analyses we used super robust. And then someone asks, did you go out and talk to human beings in that group about what they think? And that's an awkward moment if you haven't. And
Yeah.
so contextualizing the data and the outcomes with anecdotes and kind of qualitative evidence on the ground is a huge trust builder. It's like, oh, I might not trust like your coefficients, but you talk to Bill and Jack and Sally. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm listening still. So
Mm.
applying it in practical ways and gathering your data and analyzing it in ways that are robust but also practical is a good tenet. Keeping it simple. If you have a complex way of getting to an outcome or analyzing something or a simple way that's very explainable and gets you
Yeah.
most of the way there, which one should you choose? Probably the second one,
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that the scientific, but also the anecdotes, the things that bring like findings to life, and especially in a way that resonates with the person that you're talking with, like somebody either they know or a similar situation, or enough illustrations where they can envision, they can really feel it. So it's like you have the number and you have the findings, and then you have the story, and it kind of like really complements each other and brings it full circle. And I think sometimes, especially, for researchers, we get so into the numbers and we get so excited about the findings, and you don't question it because you know your method and you know your approach. But then sometimes it's easy to forget that like bit of an anecdote because you're so excited about what you found in your research that you want to go
Right.
and shut it off the rooftops. But it's like, wait, just still do that little bit because it'll help you better connect what you're really passionate about with the audience that you're going to deliver it to.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
next thing to talk about, I'm conscious of time and we have a couple more topics. The ever hot one of Gen AI. I feel like that. And oh boy, do I have lots of opinions on it, but I do want Ian to hear yours. So I know you and I covered some of this in our podcast as well. And so I borrowed some of the ideas from our conversation, but please jump in and I'll add my color anecdotes, especially as somebody developing product and looking for different ways to build Gen AI into it. But as a practitioner, as somebody that's like been on the ground, like What have you seen? Like, obviously, there's many different ways to experiment. And I think one, big lesson for all of us is do experiment, look for different ways, but obviously go eyes wide open. Test like mad, double check, like, put the human element. But what are some of the things that you have seen? Like, okay, so far, like, we're feeling pretty good about these results. Like, if you want to experiment inside your organization, and if you don't want to necessarily maybe do like a huge internal project about it, what are some things at this point kind of like we're more confident introducing inside HR?
Yeah, I guess a couple guardrails on that question too would be um, experiment, but responsibly. And by
Mm,
responsibly, like if you're experimenting with GPT-4 and uh, you're looking to understand how to um, take a lot of content and create something that's crisp and very synthesized, or different versions of that. Maybe it's job
mhm,
descriptions, maybe it's feedback, maybe it's having a difficult conversation with a coworker or a direct report. I think the the small kind of like in the flow of work moments that matter, where
mhm.
you're interacting with another human or a group, um, and you need to like warm up for that or practice for that. Like I think we have like co-pilots and coaches, like and assistants.
Yeah.
Those terms are all kind of floating around for a good reason, because that conversational interface has a ton of promise, but it also it's limited in what it understands. It's been trained on published information on the internet that in totality is less than the information that a 4-year-old that's been awake for 16,000 hours would have gotten from their visual cortex. And it's not yet as smart as a cat. The AI isn't. So like we need to understand like what the limitations are and the fact that it will make things up, so it doesn't have complex reasoning or higher order judgment or empathy or context on what's going on in the org as of 5 minutes ago that you do. So um, but it is good for some of these examples that you highlighted. I would also add that where you have work units of work and activity that is very like informationally dense, and
Yeah.
you might have to look at this policy, this procedure, this guide, this and find an answer. Gen AI is great at that.
Yeah.
So I think about like what that could mean for activities in say like HR help desk, um, where you're submitting a ticket with a question and we'll get back to you in 3 days. With the SLA is 3 days. It's like the SLA should be like 3 milliseconds. And
Yeah.
the edge cases could then get punted to a human being to further explain. Um,
Mm.
so I think these are great examples. I think that like moments that matter between a manager and a team, or a manager and a direct report, you know, recognizing someone, having a tough conversation, first time manager of a team, first meeting, like here's my speech. Is this enthusiastic? Coach me
Yeah.
on this. Gen AI is good at that. So
Mm.
you're not leaking proprietary confidential information most likely in those scenarios. You're role playing and kind of having an assistant kind of help coach you on the spot. So I think those types of examples are, you know, they abound in
Yeah.
orgs.
Yeah, I think I would, as you were saying that, something came to mind, and I'll say it for the first time, so I don't know if it'll really make sense, but I'm almost thinking about it as like an enhancement rather than a replacement of something, because it can give us ideas, it can give us feedback for us to consider and decide do we want to take it or not. I think in big part, it's not ready to be used without any human scrutiny. So to your point with some of the Q&A, some of like the frequently asked questions that are pretty straightforward, I would say like that's probably the clearest opportunity, especially if a question is asked verbatim to something you have stored, you have less risk there. But I know for me, for example, the two examples I included here were from real product development that we're doing a question pro, and I'm always testing and tweaking. And like one thing with 360 surveys, I know we were doing iterations of summarizing open-ended comments. One example I looked at, let's say it would be like, oh, Jenna is lazy and she's slow and she doesn't show up on time. And I was like, oh my God. Like, you can't give a human that summary, but AI is not thinking about it because it's just summarizing that feedback. And so it's like, okay, how do we iterate on that? And what situations is it useful? How do we change maybe like the setup? Do we have managers review something instead of just automating it in a report? Those are all the different considerations. And same things for, prompts to look for insights and surveys. Like I remember looking at some of our partners and they would say, oh, we have these amazing prompts, but the prompts that would work would have to be so incredibly specific. I was like,
Mhm.
oh goodness, like an end user is not, they don't think that way. They think of
Right.
like, hey, where are my greatest strengths? What are my biggest opportunities? And so how do we bridge the gap in between two? And so I think to me at this point, for a little bit, like I was saying, more like inspiration rather than something definitive is where AI sits really well. But a lot of times I would say, especially in HR and some of the more sensitive topics, I would still, wherever possible, use that human screen, and it could definitely increase efficiency and accelerate in many ways and give us these new ideas. My personal experience is I would still run it through the human brain just in case. I think that that little bit of extra time could actually save you a lot of heartache potentially later if you're not careful around, what comes out.
100%. I mean, that's the architecture pattern that so many applications and platform teams have now, is that like
Mm,
reinforced learning with human feedback built intentionally into the user interface, and then like in the architectural designs that would carry what the LLMs come back with.
mm,
Um, and and yeah, just to put a finer point on it, Sonia, the like LLMs, there's a lot that they don't know about about how to phrase something, the context of the situation, the values and culture of your org, the norms of your team, and this is where you're having to moderate what comes back. And if you think about doing that at scale, like putting Gen AI into like all of our training, let's say for new managers, it's like, okay, having Gen AI be able to surf and navigate and synthesize what are all the operational things you need to do as a first time manager that you just might not know about
yeah.
and where to go. It's like, okay, that's I think a very efficient way to think about it. Also, like how to have a motivating conversation with your team on day one.
Mm,
You probably need humans that have done that before in the loop to help
yeah.
augment that response that comes back. So
Mm.
yeah,
That
this
actually
is
brings us a little bit to our last slide. Yes, we
yeah,
unintentionally started talking about it already because
that's it.
it's such a close tie to AI and how it works today.
Yeah, but yeah, exactly. So I think like the pattern I've helped some orgs implement has the green bubbles are the humans, and what
Mm,
the humans are asking the AI to do, and then moderating what comes back from it is what we mean by humans in the loop. And then in the middle, there's lots of different opportunities to take what just generically we're calling your HR content, whether it's your manager one-on-one training um, or survey feedback or operational policies, et cetera, and building it within your architecture and your technology infrastructure, and then sending guided prompts to LLMs, and maybe saying only answer in the context that I gave you. So look within this
yeah.
content. Don't go pull something from uh, Glassdoor and blend it in with what we would consider our trusted content. And so
Mm,
I think that combined with human review and moderation is a very plausible and like useful way to move forward with this, to learn and not just dive into
yeah.
dark murky water wondering what you're going to see.
Yeah. And I would say, I'll talk about myself as a sample size of one. I won't project my personality in all of you, but if you ever any of you have similar personality, I'm so cautious and I'm such a perfectionist. And I'm like, is this right? Is it experiment, do it cautiously, like Ian was saying too. But I do, and again, I'll just talk about myself. I find myself being so nervous if something is exactly right and is it stated the right way and how do we use it, that I'm still working. It's still a developmental opportunity for me, but I'm still challenging myself to make it more part of my work and make it more part of my day-to-day life because I know it's going to continue to advance, right? All of us, I think, know that. And so it's the more we like allow ourselves to be uncomfortable with what it is as we learn how to advance with it, I think the better off we're going to be. And it is going to get better. And who knows? I mean, who knows what perfect is, but it's got to continue. Like there's so much investment in AI. It's got to continue to perform better over time. But I think understanding like every day, I feel like I'm looking at different articles of how you can leverage it again in HR, but also in your daily lives. So that would be my one recommendation is that even though there are cautions, you need that human touch. If you feel like you're not really experimenting with it as much today, do like do
Yeah.
something. You don't have to spend all of your time on it, but challenge yourself to at least dabble with it because if not, I would be worried you'll like I'm worried for myself, you'll be playing more catch up in the end. And it's just probably not a situation where you want to be.
Yeah. I would put a big plus one on that and just maybe cap it off by saying experiment just as an individual just to see what it can do, what it can't do. So like you have a mental model of how to think about it. And then in the workplace, I still think there's so many opportunities where you see, say, uh, an HR process or program that has 47 manual step process, let's say, and we've gotten really good at these 47 manual steps. How can AI, not Gen AI, but AI help automate that just in
Yeah.
the kind of the traditional sense of the word? But then can you create new types of value if you're automating some things and then you have time to like kind of create and think differently about ways that the outcome could be better for employees or for managers. Like Gen AI is a gateway to that, I think, and creates a lot of possibilities. So
Absolutely. And excited to see what's to come. Who knows?
I
Anything's
know.
possible. Well, Ian, thank you so much. I've been checking. I haven't seen any questions come in, and to be conscious of everyone's time, if any of you do have questions that you didn't have a chance to, pop in the chat, or if you think of something after as you're thinking about this conversation, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me. You have my contact information. Don't hesitate to get in touch with Ian. Here's his content information. You can find out more about Question Pro, more about Icona Analytics. Ian, thank you. It is
Thanks,
every
Sonia.
time I talk with you, I feel like it's such a pleasure. I learned so much. You have so much great experience. So thank you so much for taking the time to spend with me and spend with our guests. And I can't wait to see you next week in Chicago. So to
So
be
good to see you, friend. And
continued.
yeah, I can't wait for Chicago next week. But always a pleasure. Thanks for hosting, Sonia. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Take care. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.